Alright then guys, welcome to the video and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to another 20 facts on the EP3. This video was so popular with you guys, and actually off the back of that I got a load of feedback about just other things and bits that I didn't know, and also some stuff that kind of relates to some of the stuff I said in that video. So if you haven't checked that video out, go check that out first for 20 other facts. This is sort of gonna blur the lines in between that. So let's start on this list of more EP3 facts. And first up is a subtle difference between the JDM EP3 and the UK EP3, and that is the UK EP3 has the VIN number imprinted underneath the glass here, and there's like a little cutout in the window so you can actually read it. On the JDM EP3s that isn't the case. It is just printed on the bulkhead inside the engine bay, so you don't have this little cutout. Tiny little thing, but it is a difference. Also, before we go any further, a huge shout out to Steve, who has a JDM EP3, for a load of these facts, because he is like this font of knowledge of all this stuff, and that's who I've grabbed most of these from. Next up, we have something which actually, now that it's been explained, makes a lot more sense in terms of the pre-facelift JDM EP3 and 30th anniversary seats. All of the Recaro logos were gold, and it is just that over time, sun has faded them to black that has made them actually any different. If you think about the logic, it actually seems weird that Honda would put two different color seats in the same car. They are exactly the same seat, it's just that I suppose some are faded less than others, if that makes sense. So in my previous video, I mentioned that the pre-facelift cars didn't come with headrests. Now that isn't actually completely true. So it turns out that the reason that the headrests were introduced was due to an EU rule change on passenger headrests, so they had to have them. That happened midway through the pre-facelift cars. The JDM cars, obviously because they're not in the EU, never had them. That's why some people with pre-facelifts do have them and some don't. And this point again relates to my previous video when I was talking about the race base EP3. Now technically I'm right and I'm wrong with that statement. There is no official race base version of the EP3, but what there is a non-CPAC version of the JDM EP3, and that is pretty much a no option car. Now almost every single EP3 that got spec'd in Japan got spec'd with the CPAC, but there are a few that didn't, due to, I guess, people's budget at the time, or for race shops like Fields or Spoon, for example, who would have bought the non-CPAC version because they didn't need any of those optional extras that are more for road cars. So technically it is a race base because everyone that bought them to make them into race cars didn't buy the CPAC, but there are also a few non-CPAC cars that made it out as well. And leading on from that point, I do have a photo of the actual options list that come as part of the C package. So you couldn't just opt for each one of these individually, it all came as one package. And so as you can see, you get automatic aircon, which I'll talk about shortly, LCD screen that shows your mileage, that with the air temperature and all that kind of stuff, electric windows, obviously, as you know, the power locking doors, the keyless entry system, which is an interesting one. You get the light on the inside, you get a mirror on both of the sun visors, you get the rear shelf, like the piece that covers the boot, HIDs, which obviously we didn't get in the UK, but some Euro cars got, as I mentioned in my last video, the rear privacy glass, and that is the rear tints that obviously the Premier Edition cars got here. The rear wiper, that's why you can see in the non-CPAC cars that there's no hole for the wiper, it's literally just glass. And electric remote wing mirrors, which again, I'm going to talk about in a sec. So yeah, as you can see, that whole list of stuff is almost a must if you're actually ordering this car in Japan. So I can understand why hardly any cars were not a CPAC, if you see what I mean. But you can also see why tuning shops would have ordered a non-CPAC car, because they would have saved some money on the original purchase, and all of that stuff is pretty irrelevant if you're trying to build a race car anyway. So that's why the race base kind of exists, but kind of doesn't exist. And if you've made it this far in the video, it would do me a huge favor if you could just hit that subscribe button down below if you're enjoying the content, because there's so many of you guys that are watching the videos that aren't subscribed, and it would really help the channel grow, help me out moving forward if you could subscribe. Also leave a comment, and also like this one whilst you're at it as well. Also, if you want to support the channel a little bit more, you can pick up some of the Limitar stuff that I've launched. We've got hoodies, as you can see, we've got windscreen banners, we've got t-shirts, got some stickers. There are a couple of free bits on the website too, so I'd really appreciate if you could check that out. And if you want to pick something up, it goes directly to supporting making the videos and bringing you more content. So just a way you can support more if you want to. Anyway, let's get back to it. This is a super small one and kind of irrelevant if you don't have them like I don't, but the fog lights, if you were to spec them on the UK cars, they came in the pre-facelift and the facelift cars. The lights themselves are actually the same throughout the entire build of the EP3, but the brackets changed based on obviously the different design front bumper between the pre-facelift and the facelift car. So as you're all very well aware, in the UK, we do not have power folding mirrors at all with the EP3. That is, however, not the case, as you would have seen from that C package, for the JDM cars, and that is such a cool feature. As you can see, them folding in by themselves is amazing, and also you can see where the switch is. I cannot believe that feature didn't make it to the UK cars. It is so cool. I would definitely use that if I had it. Also part of the C package was the auto air conditioning. As you can see here, it says auto here, and it also says auto here. So this is the cluster from a JDM EP3. So you just stick it on that and it does its own thing. I kind of feel like I should probably reinstall this thing back in the car, because that's a pretty cool piece to have, and I just got it by fluke. Another interesting one is, you may not know this, but the facelift JDM EP3s actually came with the same two-tone red and black Recaros that the Premier Editions came with in the UK. What happened was, Japan didn't sell loads of pre-facelift EP3s, and when the facelift came around, they sold way less than Honda were expecting to, which actually meant that there was a lot of surplus stuff left over from the JDM spec cars that never made it to a JDM spec car. So what that means is that actually the Premier Edition was never a special edition, and as a lot of you are aware, it was just the last couple of years of the production of the car that they were putting that stuff in. That is one, why you'll see very few JDM facelift EP3s, and two, is why you'll see the same red and black Recaros in those as you do in the Premier Edition. A couple of quick engine ones now. The early pre-facelift cars came with dual valve springs, like an inner and outer spring, whereas some point during the pre-facelift production, it switched to just single springs. So it depends on how early your car is to whether your K20 has the dual springs in or not. Not that you can see it, because I don't have either of these things, but the Mugen designed baffled sump is a completely different design to what you see from the likes of Spoon, for example. So as you can see, it almost looks like a standard sump, whereas when you look at the Spoon one, for example, you can see this big plate over the top. Apparently when Mugen were asked about why this is the case, they basically said that they tried and tested it on track and they didn't want to use anything more than necessary, which I think is a brilliant response to such a question. As you can see, this car is cosmic grey, we have Nighthawk black, and we have the satin silver. Those are all optional colour options that you could spec, because the only standard base color that the EP3 came in was Milano red, which actually, when you think about it, does make sense, because Milano red is the only non-metallic paint option, because it means that basically everyone that chose a different color to red chose an optional extra when they were speccing the car. So as you can see, this roof doesn't have a cutout for a sunroof, and that's because it was never an option for the UK EP3, and I believe that it wasn't an option for the JDM EP3 either. However, there are some aftermarket options if you wanted to install one after you got the car. I've actually got links to both of those. I think it is discontinued now, but I'll leave those links down below if you want to have a look at the original listings. And also you can have a look here, as Haas from Garage EP3 has some photos that he had on a car that had a sunroof as well. I do believe that it was an option on the EP3 Si that the US market got, but just a cool little piece in case you ever wanted to see an EP3 with a sunroof. As you may very well be aware, there is a thing called Honda Access, which are optional extras and things like that available for the cars. Now, interestingly, there is actually a different Honda Access for Japan as there is for Europe. So for example, the fog lights are an Honda Access option, and the Japanese versions are obviously made in Japan, whereas the Euro Honda Access ones are made in Belgium. So as you can see, this is what the UK EP3 rear bench looks like, and there is no seat in the middle, so it is just a four-seater, as I'm sure you're all very well aware. However, when you look at the Japanese version of the car, you can see that the rear seats are actually more of their own individual seats rather than one whole rear bench, and the middle piece is very different. Definitely a obvious visual difference compared to the UK cars. A common modification for Civics of an earlier generation were a mid-tier spoiler, and it turns out there is actually a mid-spoiler option for the EP3. This seems to be a part that fits on the EP3 Si in the US, which I can only assume will also fit the UK cars, but I haven't seen anyone do it. I'll leave a link to this part down below if you want to pick one up. And talking about the US Spec Si EP3, there are actually quite a few differences, but most importantly is the Honda factory performance option that gave you a whole host of upgrades over the standard car. There were no power upgrades, but there were a lot of visual differences, including different side skirts, which are similar to the UK spec side skirts, but with a slight kick, a different front lip and a different rear lip. Now, I really like the look of the rear lip. Potentially most striking from the outside were the Honda factory performance decals that came spec'd as an option on this car. This photo is not an aftermarket piece. This is how you could get it from Honda if you tick the box for this option set. Crazy that this is an actual factory decal, looks insane. And there are various other pieces to this pack as well, including different wheels and things like that. There's actually a full video that Doug DeMuro's done on the EP3 Si with all of these parts on it. He goes into far more detail, so I'll leave a link to that down below if you want to find out more about that car. He explains in that video that it was an $11,000 option, which is nuts. He did also say that most people probably only paid $5,000 for it, and it was just like marked down as like a dealer option that was showing that it was taking money off. A couple of smaller points from the US Civic Si EP3 are slightly different design on the rear tail lights. As you can see, this is red in this version, whereas on the US car this is orange. The passenger shelf storage area thing is different as well. As you can see in the US car, it's got 3 divides, which the UK car doesn't have. I feel like that is a way more useful design than just having this whole tray. And finally, the US EP3 has cruise control, and I cannot believe this was not an option in the UK. It's so annoying. But like I said already, go check out Doug's video if you want a bit more info. Pretty interesting to watch, including the carbon effect pieces that are on the center console and around the vents, which is another piece I'm going to talk about later in this video. Now, this is one as an EP3 owner that I know all too well. Apparently, the reason that the EP3 doesn't have an exhaust tunnel is actually down to what Honda thought was the future for the rear passenger space. As you all know, in the rear of the EP3 it is completely flat, and that is because there is no exhaust tunnel, and the sacrifice for that was the exhaust sitting so low as it does on these cars. Is that a worthy trade-off? I'll let you decide. Personally, I think I'd rather have had the lump in the back and had the exhaust higher. And so in my previous facts video I mentioned the actual cost of these things, and I couldn't really find much info out there on actual prices. Well, a few of you guys got back to me and have got cars that have got the original bill of sale included as part of the pack, which is so cool. As you can see with this one, so this was, if you look at the date, was registered 5 days before the purchase of the car, so that is a brand new car. And the cost of that, if you take off the additional pieces that were added on, that was £16,708.25, which with inflation today is £28,454.91. And whilst we're talking about the price of cars, the photos you're seeing right now is of one of the last ever EP3s to be registered on the road. If you look at this piece of paper, you can see here that it was registered on the 29th of September 2006. If you have a car that was registered later than that, I would love to know, because that's only 3 months off of the end of 2006, so we're getting very close to 2007. And that car cost £16,500, which, if you work that out for inflation, that is £27,461.18. Super cool that that must be one of the last ever registered EP3s. I've got some photos of the press launch for the EP3. So as you can see, this huge line of black EP3s, they're all getting tested. And also check out the Accord police car. I can't find any other information about this Accord police car anywhere else, so if you know any more about it, please let me know down below. There is a story going around that one of the journalists actually crashed one of those EP3s about 2 or 3 corners into the test drive. But how cool is it to see that many EP3s in one place? We've got a few photos of EP3 parts in magazines, so shout out to Gabe for sending these photos. You can see various different aero options, the Moog and stuff, and you can see the Buddy Club stuff too. But there's some other crazy stuff in there, like the US Civic from Italy. That's got like a wide body on it, and that front bumper's interesting. As you can see, it's a Japanese magazine, but they've got a US EP3 in there with the kit on it. That orange car is the US car. But then also check this out. This is a listing of so many bracing parts for the EP3. Crazy amounts of bracing that I've never seen before. But it's really interesting to be able to see just how much stuff was created for the EP3. And now we have a big one, and that is the Honda Access options for the JDM EP3 and the actual catalogue of which you could order stuff from as optional extras for your car. So as you can first see, there are some carbon fibre effect pieces that sit around the centre console and the air vents, which are pieces I was talking about earlier with the US spec EP3. So I wonder if those pieces were shared. Obviously they couldn't have been exactly, because they sit on different sides of the car, so they would have been handed differently. As you can see also, there are some kick panels in carbon fibre effect, that same goldy kind of carbon effect that the centre console pieces are. It's a shame that it's not real carbon fibre, but a cool piece because it's OEM Honda. And then you can see you've got the red mats like I've got in my car, but also you can see the fog light options. Now interestingly, there's 2 pictures there, because one is for clear fog lights and the other is for yellow fog lights. So it's so rad that you could spec yellow fog lights from factory from Honda. Then the 3 pieces there, those are Civic number plate frames, obviously JDM specific. You've got some horrible looking like bumper protector guards. I don't know why you'd ever want those. Then you can see that there's There's some roof rack options and then bits for storing snowboard, skis, things like that. Then you've got winter tires as well as the snow chains. Then there's some other really wild pieces. So you've got mobile phone controls, so you could answer calls whilst in the car, which if you think about this from like 2001 when this car launched, it's pretty cool that those were options. Then there's stuff that I've just never seen before. So the piece you can see in the windscreen, that is like a light sensor, so it will automatically switch the headlights on and off or put side lights on, things like that. You've also got the mat that sits in the passenger cubby hole piece. We've then got an air purifier, which is just such a Japanese thing, absolutely crazy. You could get actually an illumination pack, which is actually what they call it in the FL5 Type R now, for the footwell, so you can have lights in the footwell of the EP3 from the factory. But you've also then got some really funny things. This is like a center armrest thing. I'm not really sure how that mounts into the EP3. You've then got a little bin that you can attach. I think it sits in the gap in between the two rear seats, but I could be wrong because I've never seen one installed before. The three bags, the blue, the red and the black, those are actually like a Honda specific poncho that you could have in the car, like a coat in case you get caught out in the rain. And then there's the Honda logo, which actually says on it, I don't know if this is just a weird English translation, but it literally says on it, accessories that say "It's my Honda," which is weird. And that piece is actually a blanket. Finally, potentially the weirdest one of all of those bits, there is actually a little mini cigarette lighter port hoover that you could spec to actually hoover up the inside of your car. Just so many pieces on that list that are quintessentially Japanese, and I would just love to see all of them in person and just actually see what they look like in the car. But as well as that, you could also spec the car with like DVD/sat-nav screens, and there was a whole host of those that you could spec, as well as different car seats that you could choose from Honda. And as I'm sure you are aware, guys, it's starting to get dark. Let me know down below if this has been interesting for you guys. Let me know if you've got any other interesting facts. If you made it this long in the video, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the channel. Plenty of videos on the EP3 as well as my S2000. Like this one, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.